So I'm very excited to finally bring you guys another Diablo IV build guide. This time it's an early in-game Barrage Rogue, and I've been having absolute ton of fun with this build. An absolute blast. It's very strong just as a baseline, and it's accentuated even further by having good gear, but it's definitely not mandatory. As you can see, I'm in World Tier 4, I'm level 55, but keep in mind I do have all the renown points. That's essentially 5 extra levels of Paragon points. Keep that in mind. And again, I've gotten very good gear drops. I've been very lucky. I have 2 uniques that are very strong for this build, and I have pretty good gear overall, and it's all pretty much all upgraded. That said, you really don't need super good gear for this build to work. Capstone Dungeon boss died in a hilariously short amount of time. Just keep in mind, you may need a few extra levels. In fact, I would probably recommend you wait until about level 60 to really give it a proper go, where you really try to use this build to get the World Tier 4. That said, just as before, if you want to see this build in action, like proper full unedited gameplay, there'll be a link in the description and the comments below to both my Capstone Dungeon clear, including a separate timestamp for the boss, also a Whisper Dungeon in World Tier 4, the full clear, unedited, nothing like that. Alright, and finally, all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it, and first let's dive right into the gear. So before we get into the specifics of the gear, let's first talk about your overall stat priorities. First of all, that's going to be critical strike damage and vulnerable damage. These are your primary damage modifiers, and what you care about the most. Stack as much as you can of both of them. They are equal in priority, and they should be as even as possible. These are true damage multipliers, as in they are multipliers, not additive bonuses. So if you have, say, total 300% total, it's better to have them as evenly split as possible. The closer that 300% is split to 150, the better. Moving on, other than that, since we are stacking crit damage, you do need some crit chance. You get a lot of critical chance from your passive skills. Won't mostly reflect in your stats here, but you do get a lot of crit chance from the passive skill tree, so you don't actually need that much. You definitely need a little bit. Other than that, core skill damage is very good. Any sort of damage modifier you can get relating to something you have access to, damage to chill, damage to poison, not quite as good as damage to chill, in my opinion. Crowd controlled enemies, anything along those lines, also good, but just not as good as something like core skill damage, right? And then obviously damage reduction, any sort of survivability skills, very good. It does have some survivability issues, so stack as much as you can get. Other than that, I would make a recommendation, personally, movement speed. This is an excellent quality of life skill. It also does kind of function as a survivability passive skill, or stat, I mean, in terms of mobility generally translates to survivability in action RPGs because you can move out of the way of attacks, stuff like that. But for me, it really just is about the quality of life. Being able to travel through dungeons faster, move from objective to objective faster. It's just such a massive improvement. You don't need this at all, but it would be my recommendation to get a decent chunk. You see, I've got 142%. Rogue does have a little bit of movement speed just inherently from the passive skill tree, but you can get it on your boots, you can get it on your amulet. I would recommend you get it on both, personally, but you don't have to. Now let's go ahead and dive into the specifics I mentioned. So we are going to be wanting to use a crossbow in this build because they have vulnerable damage implicit. They always have that vulnerable damage line at the top. After that, for your substats, obviously critical damage, vulnerable damage. You can get critical damage with imbued skills, also very good, but obviously less of a priority than critical strike damage. And then other than that, just general things, you obviously core skill damage like I mentioned, and then any sort of damage to chilled, poisoned, crowd controlled, anything you've got access to, all very good here. Moving on to our melee weapons, you don't actually care about the damage per second on these at all. It does not matter. These are purely stat sticks. Only care about the added stats on them, right? So, and for that reason, you do want to use swords on both slots unless you have the Condemnation Unique Dagger. We'll get into that in a second. But for your swords, obviously they have critical strike damage on the implicit, but for the affixes, vulnerable damage, critical damage, both your top priority. Once again, pretty much the same as for your crossbow. All priorities are exactly the same. Now moving on to Condemnation. If you do have it, this is a very good unique weapon for the build. That multiplier down there, that is a true multiplier. You can tell because it's got a little X beside the percent. It's not additive, it's a true multiplier. If you don't have this, don't worry about it. Just use another sword. Moving on to our armor. I'll give a few exceptions here, but basically you only care about survivability here. Damage reduction, life, armor, with a few exceptions. Obviously, on the helmet, you can get imbuement ranks, so Shadow Imbuement, Cold Imbuement, you get either one of those. Both are good. Shadow Imbuement's probably a little better overall in my opinion, but they're both good. On the gloves, you can get critical strike chance, which you won't, and you can get ranks of Barrage. Both very, very good to have, but other than that, survivability is king on the armor. For your boots, don't forget some movement speed. And if you don't have these unique boots, don't worry about it. You definitely don't need them. I will go ahead and say for now, go ahead and ignore all the legendary aspects on all of this gear. I have made a few mistakes on how I've set my aspects up, but we'll cover that more in depth in the next section. And finally, looking at jewelry, amulet, movement speed, once again, you can get it. Other than that, quarter armor reduction can be nice, and then any kind of survivability, basically. For our rings, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, critical strike chance are your priority stats. Rings can get all three of those things. That's what you're looking for. Go get it. And that's pretty much it for your gear and the stats on the gear. Finally, we can get into something that's going to get a little bit more complicated. Legendary aspects. Now, I do want to say that my aspect setup is wrong and bad, and you shouldn't copy it. I will go over instead what you should have. But first, let's talk about the one aspect that doesn't come from the codex that's important for the build. It's going to be the Umbrus aspect. As you can see here, on a lucky hit, critical strikes with marksman skills have up to a 30 to 50% chance to grant a free Dark Shroud Shadow. What this does for you is allow you to take Dark Shroud off your skill bar and put another imbuement skill, specifically Cold Imbuement, on instead. Very good for the build, but it's not mandatory for it to function. So if you don't have it, don't worry about it too much. As you may or may not know, aspect on the amulet and two-handed weapon slots do get a bonus. And what you should have on the amulet is the aforementioned Umbrus aspect. Obviously, I made a mistake and I didn't put it in the right spot. It's just me being an idiot. That should be on your amulet. If you don't have the Umbrus aspect yet, I would probably recommend you use what I've got here on the amulet. This is just some free extra critical strike chance. Constantly applying vulnerable, you constantly get a critical strike chance. But it is super overkill, to be honest. You don't need it. And once you've got Umbrus aspect, I wouldn't recommend using this aspect at all. Now, on your crossbow, you should be using Edge Master's aspect. Again, I'm an idiot. I've got the wrong thing. But if you don't know what that is, it's from the codex. You'll still up to 10 to 20% increased damage. That's a multiplier, by the way, based on your available primary resource cast. Again, 3 damage multiplier. Very good. Now, moving on to the codex. Now, for your offensive aspects, there is one choice I'm going to offer you between two aspects. But first of all, again, the Edge Master's aspect, again, obviously put that on a crossbow. And then the Rapid aspect. This is a combo points build. Basic skill attack speed is obviously very good. Aspect of branching volleys. This gives you extra, crowd clearing. Your arrows have a chance to split, arrow. Very, very good. Next, you want aspect of the expectant. Again, combo points built. You're using basic attacks, and this is just a free damage bonus every time you're using your combo points setup. Very good. Now, the choice I mentioned is going to be between aspect of arrow storms and aspect of corruption. And the reason I say this is because this is kind of just a personal choice. I like aspect of arrow storms because it interacts with one of your defensive aspects and also your passive, which gives you healing when you get critical strikes on nearby enemies. It does work for that. However, I will say aspect of corruption is probably overall better. But personally, I like the aspect of arrow storms. And also, it's a pretty cool looking effect. I like it. But probably should run aspect of corruption instead. Now, getting into defensive aspects, the aspect I mentioned that interacting with is, of course, aspect of disobedience. Arrow storms obviously help stack this up a little bit faster, but not mandatory, not necessary. But you do want aspect of disobedience. Definitely mandatory. You want aspect of might, of course, using base attacks all the time to stack combo points. Free damage reduction. And then finally, you want cheats aspect. You may notice I don't actually have unlocked yet. I'm personally using a shrouding aspect for now, but I'm planning to go do this soon. I swear I'm gonna get it done. But you should be using cheats aspect. This is a lot of damage reduction. You do have quite a bit of crowd control application on the build. You've got slow, you've got chill, you've got freeze, you've got quite a bit. Very nice survivability wise. So go ahead and get that unlocked. Unlike me, don't be lazy. And that's gonna be pretty much it for the aspects. Just kind of fit those where you can, just get them on. Not want to go over specific spots because again, my build is all messed up. But all that out of the way, it's finally time to get into the skill tree and specialization, which you've already heard is combo points, but we'll talk about inner sight as well. Let's get into it. Now let's talk about specializations really quickly. The kind of specialization of choice here is going to be combo points, especially if you've got the Condemnation Unique Dagger. Even if you don't, I would still recommend combo points over inner sight, but you can use inner sight if you wish. It probably is more of a personal preference thing, to be honest. I found that combo points was just better for having the extra burst damage and just overall felt more consistent. Where inner sight really seems to shine to me is in boss fights, but any boss fight that summons minions can actually make inner sight kind of a use. The mark will often go to an enemy who's off in a corner, and it can just be annoying to get it to activate, right? Again, it's up to you, especially if you don't have the unique dagger. Moving on to the actual skill tree itself, go ahead and get into it, starting with our basic skill. Of course, we are choosing Puncture. Flow gives us some vulnerable application if you need it, and some extra energy generation. Take this out to Fundamental Puncture, makes it so you throw 3 blades instead of 1, but what you really care about here is the vulnerable application, and it does also hit 3 times, which is kind of useful for some other things, but that's it for that. Moving on to core skills, again, we are of course a Barrage build, so you want 5 points in Barrage. Take that out to Advanced Barrage, of course. Very nice. One thing you can kind of do, even if you don't already have the exploit glyph, you can get an enemy with vulnerable puncture and use that to activate Enhanced Barrage, guaranteed chance to ricochet you hit a vulnerable enemy or critically strike, either one. But very easy to guarantee all a good chunk of your arrows ricochet. Activate that Advanced Barrage. It's not really as annoying to set up as it sounds, because it kind of mostly just does it for itself, right? And we do want 1 point in sturdy, so we can take 3 points in siphoning strikes. This is just extra. This is just health generation. Very good. The passive skill I mentioned before that interacts with the storm arrow aspect. But again, totally up to you if you want to take that or not. Moving on to agility skills. Shadow Step is our source of Unstoppable. It's also a pretty useful skill in general. You get into annoying enemies a little bit easier, but it is primarily for Unstoppable. It's got a pretty short cooldown combined with Discipline. Shadow Step is 3-second reduction if you haven't hit that enemy in the recent period, right? And this is almost always going to activate. You shouldn't really be spamming this too often, or you're probably going to get yourself called out. And that's probably going to be when you're going to die the most, is whenever you're crowd controlled. So definitely try not to waste your Shadow Step. And then you do want 3 ranks in Weapon Mastery here. 15% more damage for crossbows. Too good to pass up. Moving on to our Subterfuge skills. 1 point in Dark Shroud. Out to Subverting Dark Shroud. This is a nice damage reduction. Remember, with the Umbrous aspect, this is just generating for free. I say for free, it's on critical, it's on lucky hit, but extra movement speed, lots of damage reduction, up to 40% damage reduction if you have all 5 shadows. Then we're also taking Poison Trap out to countering Poison Trap. 2 main purposes for Poison Trap. One is to activate a passive you get later. Passive right here, which we'll cover in a moment. Also, chance to reset your imbuement cooldowns. Very good. Finally, want 3 points in both Exploit and Malice. Tons of damage here, and to have healthy and injured, and also just vulnerable damage. Very good. Moving down, Shadow Imbuement. This is our imbuement skill you take first, and then take this out to Blended Shadow Imbuement. This is your main source of mob clearing, makes enemies explode, gives you extra crit chance against enemies that are injured, that are affected by Shadow Imbuement and injured, of course. This is very good. Again, your main source of mob clearing. And then once you've got the Umbrous aspect, you do want to take Cold Imbuement, and then take this out to Mixed Cold Imbuement, right? This is just a ton of extra damage and allows you to take the Frigid Finesse passive. This gives you extra damage to chilled and double extra damage to frozen enemies. Very strong. However, if you don't have the Umbrous aspect, essentially you just take these points out, and in my opinion, you just put them in Dark Shroud, and you put Dark Shroud on your bar instead. Also, this is what I had originally. But once you've got the Empress, take those points out of Dark Shroud, put them into Mixed Hold Imbuement instead. Don't forget, take Precision Imbuement, 9% crit rate to all imbued skills, very, very strong. 1 point to Shadow Crash, and then 2 points in Consuming Shadows. This is kind of option. You don't think you need this much energy generation, you can put like an extra point in Dark Shroud. A little bit of extra damage reduction, 0.4% per shadow. Personally, I like Consuming Shadows better. Tons of energy generation, probably overkill, but sometimes I like to sit there and spam without thinking of it, okay? Don't judge me too much. Moving out to the ultimate, skill tree, we're only taking passives here, of course. 3 points in Trap Mastery, 12% crit strike after a poison trap activates. That's the main purpose of Poison Trap, to be honest. 12% crit rate is massive. And 3 points in Innervation, more energy generation. 1 point for Adrenaline Rush, take 3 points in Haste. Honestly, you could probably do without 3 points in Haste. Very good. Movement speed when you're above, 50% energy. Attack speed when you're below. Both of those effects are very good in my opinion. But I would say if you really want to, you could probably take these out, put them somewhere else. Maybe put them in like Dark Shroud if you really, really want to. Or that's about the only thing I can think of that's worth it. You can put them in Dark Shroud if you want to, basically. Personally, I find Haste is absolutely worth the points. It's up to you. That's going to be it for the skill tree, so let's finally move on into the Paragon boards, and I'm going to go ahead and apologize for advance, because Paragon board is kind of rough to explain, but let's go ahead and get into it. And for the Paragon board, there's 2 primary options I want to offer you for the second board. But for the first board, I think it's pretty obvious like what kind of like the best option is. First, go up the damage side, glyph, and then continue heading up the damage side. For the glyph here, I'm going to really recommend the combat one. 1 extra critical strike damage with core skills. Obviously very good for our build. Barrage is a core skill, of course, and damage is one of our primary things. And then it also gives you some extra resource generation, some extra energy generation. Very nice. It really helps keep your energy high as possible. For the Edge Masters aspect, very, very good. And it's also a pretty good, starting layout for intelligence. You can very easily get all the intelligence you need activated. Now for your second board, I'm personally using, what is this board called? Cunning Stratagem. I'm using Cunning Stratagem. Basically just come up, kind of rush through these nodes straight up to the glyph here. You're going to want to put Exploit here. Well, it does work out pretty well for Exploit. Exploit's just kind of too good to pass up. Obviously, extra vulnerable damage. Always applying vulnerable. Extra vulnerable damage is obviously very good. And this gives you some extra free, very easy, vulnerable application. And then finally take this up and go out to your next Paragon board. I haven't decided what I want to run here yet, but if I had to offer an alternative to this board, if you don't want to run this, because this Cunning Stratagem node is really, really far out of the way, and honestly, I'm not super convinced it's actually worth getting. So if you wanted to run an alternative, I think what I would probably recommend would be Exploit Weakness. Probably rotated in this alignment here. This alignment. And what I would recommend here is go all the way up. This is obviously going to be a longer term investment sort of thing. All the way up, get these vulnerable damage nodes. Go to get this glyph socket. And then you got some potion healing there that you don't care about. You've got some more vulnerable damage here. You can go up and get this extra, legendary node. Quite a bit of damage there. And you've also got a damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. What you can do if you want is kind of start up, go this way, and get this damage reduction. If you really feel like you're too squishy, really feel like you need the extra survivability, go up and get this. This is a good chunk of survivability. You get some extra armor. And that's a good chunk of damage reduction for vulnerable enemies, especially if you can meet those stat requirements, although they are pretty high. If you're going to do that, I'd probably recommend you just kind of come up, go this way, and then maybe go ahead and get this, legendary aspect, or legendary node, then come over up here, get this, get these, and then sort of branch out, and you'll have the same exit gate that you'll be using this one, right? And I think those are kind of your best options overall. This is unfortunately kind of a mediocre board because the layout is kind of awkward, kind of hard to use. because you've got so much stuff that you like, that you want, but it's all kind of spread out in a really annoying way. And it's a lot of nodes to invest to get all of these things, but they are very, very good. So that's up to you. On the same token, I guess, getting this legendary node, which is also very, very good, is also a very high point investment and probably something I wouldn't recommend getting in pretty late. But kind of up to you personally. I'm planning to rush straight to my third board in this gate right here. But up to you again. Again, remember, if you're only level 55, you won't have as many points as me if you haven't done your renown. Whew, I hope I've covered all that pretty well in a pretty understandable way. The Paragon boards are kind of hard to recommend very well because there's so much to them, so many options you could take. But I think those are my best 2 recommendations for your second board. But feel free to ignore my advice. Oh, I know, I'm just some random on the internet. And finally, go over a quick basic gameplay rundown, tell you how it works, how everything goes. Get into it. Before the basic gameplay of this build, you do kind of have to rotate some cooldowns, kind of juggle some numbers, basically. It's really not too hard to play. Basically, if you're fighting against regular monsters, let me see if I can find anything. Well, anyways, obviously, you throw these, get your combo points, that's your puncture. Damage. Generally, you're going to want to start fights kind of like medium range, start your shadow imbuement. You know, if your shadow imbuement, this is going to cause enemies to explode when you kill them. Really good clear. And then, rotate out your cold imbuement, do those, and then, you set down your trap. I would try to make sure you use your imbuement cooldowns before you lay your trap down, just in case you do get the imbuement reset. But don't agonize all over it too much. Just, be aware that the trap can reset your cooldowns, right? And then, if there's a particularly, enemy you need to deal with right away that you can't quite get to by just shooting at it, you can use Shadow Step to get in and, just shotgun that enemy down. Keep in mind that Barrage does shotgun enemies at point blank range. By that, I mean multiple arrows can hit the same target. So you can just pump all the arrows into one enemy. And for bosses, you basically want to switch your priority between cold and shadow. Is pretty much it. Cold first, then shadow. And that's basically all there is to it. Pretty simple, right? Really fun build though. Lots of explosions, lots of damage. Very, very fun to play. Let me know if you've got any questions. Again, gameplay footage will be linked in the description and comments below. I will catch you guys in the next video. Till then, take it easy and have a good one, everybody.